We are here today to talk to you about the new PMO Flashmob report that we've been working blood, sweat and tears on for hoping that you're all right on this wonderful sunny Tuesday. We are here today to talk to you about the new PMO Flashmob report that we've been working blood, sweat and tears on for a few months now, and essentially we've got a new report that we were going to launch a few weeks ago, but hey, that was in another lifetime. So we thought we'd do it today, and essentially what we're going to be covering is this is our 5th report, and never one to shy away from a topic that is quite difficult. We carry on in that vein, and let me introduce you to Eileen. Eileen, how are you?
I'm not so bad. Sitting here in my shed at the bottom of the garden, looking at the sunshine, but again, we've been working on this for quite a while now, so it's quite nice to get it released out into the public, because I know a lot of people have been asking for us. And although we're sad that Project Challenge didn't take place, we're glad to have the opportunity and have everybody on board so we can kind of share our findings.
Super. Do you want to kick off for us today?
Yes, we can do. So interestingly, so co-hosts and I'm not sure I can do the forward on the slideshow, so we shall see how that goes. So I might need to get Lindsay to press some buttons for me. So the topic of conversation is the AI PMO, whether this is a threat or an opportunity. Lindsay and I have been really kind of pulling this together. We can kind of go past, been working on this now for about probably the last kind of 12 to 18 months. Actually, we've been aware of this topic looming on the horizon and starting to embrace a number of the PMOs that we have been watching. And we've been trying to educate and provide opportunities for people who work in and around PMOs to learn more about the subject and to get together with them to share what they're doing and how it improves some of the role in the PMO and what we can do. Quite interestingly, there's been as many scare stories in the press in terms of and LinkedIn about what it can do to the PMOs, and including the fact that kind of PMOs are going to disappear. So we really wanted to kind of go out and meet some individuals to see what it was all about, and so we could bring to you what's actually happening on the ground and bring some reality to the situation. So in terms of the two of us, just for those of you who've not met us before, and it's great to have some new names around. My name is Eileen Roden. I'm a consultant and trainer. I did have a proper, I always have to say this, I did have a proper job, and I managed PMOs for 15 years before I turned into a consultant and trainer. And I work closely with Lindsay on the PMO learning, PMO Flashmob, and a little bit of work on the conference. Do you want to just introduce yourself, Lindsay?
Yeah, sure.
Hello.
Yeah, sure. Sorry, I forgot. It's just we'll be doing that many different webinars recently. Hi, I'm Lindsay, and I basically created PMO Flashmob going back a few years now, and keep putting all this stuff out there and bringing people together. But just generally love PMO subjects and PMO people in general. I think they're a great bunch. So yeah, that's me.
Okay, so I'll let Lindsay tell you about the actual day that happened when we went off to London.
Yeah, well, what we normally do is we have something called a PMO Managers Lunch, and as Eileen said, we're trying to find people that have got something to say on particular subjects that we are finding difficult to get to the bottom of. And the whole idea is that if we can get PMO managers around the table, feed them with some really nice food and lots of nice wine and beers, that they'll open up and tell us things. And that's just essentially what happened with this one that happened back in November. And essentially what Eileen and I do is pull together basically a number of questions that we want to try and get answers for. And I think it's like anything when you're doing a roundtable discussion like this, is that you can often be led into places where you didn't know you were going to be going. You know, there was a number of different questions and things that we wanted to get to the bottom of. And essentially what we had thought about is, because Eileen and I had been doing some time sponsoring the Project Hack events, which were happening in London, which was all about is using AI technologies in a project environment. And we've been going along to those for, as you said, about 12 to 18 months, and getting more and more perplexed, I think is a word, about how we're going to actually be able to use some of this stuff, because it is fantastic, but it feels all very kind of techie and a bit forbidding, especially if you're not that naturally way inclined about IT and software and all that kind of stuff. So these were some of the fundamental questions that that we wanted to try and get to the bottom of. And we found that actually we needed to talk to people that were from a PMO background in order to be able to give us some of the kind of right level of answers that we wanted, and the kind of practicalities of answers that we wanted. So over the course of a few hours, quite a few drinks, these were some of the things that, questions that were asked, and obviously answers that are going to be in the report. And obviously we're going to talk to you about some of those things now through the course of the webinar.
I think it's worth mentioning as well, whenever we do these, so Lindsay and I between us have got quite a large network that we've built up, and you know, lots of friends around the kind of the flash mob, and so we put a call out to see who wants to, well, often we know people and we kind of contact them and invite them. Very often we put the call out and say, you know, if you're using these technologies, would you like to come for lunch? So, you know, as Lindsay said, it's not necessarily a free lunch because we want some information from them. But we often get a huge list of people who are desperate to kind of come along and want to share what they're doing. But what's fascinating is, certainly for the last 2 years, the subjects that we are choosing to do are deliberately hard for us to find people, because they are actually at the kind of the forefront. And so every year it becomes really kind of difficult, and it's almost a kind of a recognition that we must have chosen the right subject if we're struggling to find people who came along. But it was fascinating, the range of people who came in terms of the companies that they represented, you know, from kind of private organizations to some large kind of consultancy organizations who are doing it just in their companies but on behalf of clients, to individuals who are not necessarily there representing their PMA, but there as individuals who have demonstrated just an interest in the subject and have started playing with it in their own particular space. So it was quite a wide range of individuals. I don't want people to get the impression that these are all kind of huge blue chip companies who've had lots of money to invest. It very much isn't that, though there was obviously a couple of organizations who did. So we do believe it's a subject that's relevant for everybody, but it was certainly a measure of where it is in terms of the people's learning curves and the adoption of that in their organizations. So you've got a poll, haven't you, Lindsay?
Yes, sorry, I'm kind of like, I'm so excited to get going, but I forgot about the poll. Oh dear. So we wanted to, two of us. So we wanted to just launch a quick poll just to make sure that you're sitting upright in your seats and listening. We wanted to just ask you this quick question, which is, where are you on your AI journey in the PMO right now? We'd like to see what you are thinking, feeling, doing, not doing, just to get a feel for what is happening out there. So as that's coming in at the moment, just got nearly half of you voting. So come on, wake up. And you should be able to see a poll on the webinar right now. So I think that gives it enough time, do you know? Yeah, I think so. Okay, so what we've got here then is perhaps no surprise. We have got about half of you are starting to read and learn more about AI, which is brilliant, which is kind of where we set out at the beginning of this year to hopefully bring a little bit more to people in terms of flash mob events and things like that. But you know, obviously a large proportion there are not really sure what it means. So hopefully by the end of this session, we'll be able to, you know, you'll have a few more insights that will help you on the right track. So Eileen, these AI technologies, what's it? These are the four things that were talked about quite a lot.
And one of the things that I always find kind of quite interesting is kind of how that is referred to. So what we've got is really some thinking about what they actually are. And I don't know whether people understand what all of the four is. So I did say, Lindsay, it was important that we actually kind of go back to the basics, because they all have different meanings. So Lindsay, you have to do the control and press the button. So first one, in terms of artificial intelligence. So if we had the hands up, this is the time we would ask, who's got Siri or Alexa around their house? And interestingly, Siri and Alexa are this demonstration where machines appear to have some intelligence that we would expect of human beings. So Alexa in our kitchen, which my grandchildren use to request the poo-poo song, which for those of you with Alexa is kind of, is always an interesting kind of question to ask her, and you'll be very surprised at what comes back. But it's where we use computers to actually kind of ask questions, and instead of it just being a kind of a standard flow chart in terms of it's definitely this or it's definitely that, they can actually deal with things that are a bit like or most like, and therefore it appears that they're thinking and applying some intelligence. And it's quite fascinating in terms of where artificial intelligence is coming, not just in the kind of the Siri and Alexa mode, but also in terms of things like in the project management arena. One of the things that's used with artificial intelligence is something called sentiment analysis, where it actually it looks at the types of words that you use, the length of those words and the tone, and can make some calculations in terms of potentially kind of how you feel. Some great project meeting software out there that gives an assessment on how stakeholders feel about the objectives and how much trust and faith they have in the project plans, which is a really kind of fascinating kind of way of using artificial intelligence.
I think one of the things that's worth mentioning here is that the artificial intelligence is kind of the umbrella term for those three things that beneath it. So the machine learning, predictive analytics, robotic process automation. Ultimately, artificial intelligence is all about data. It all comes from data. So when we hear those words, I don't know about you, but you know, it's all those science fiction films and Jude Law being that robot. Actually, it's a lot more boring than that. It's probably more software level rather than actual tin robots.
So exciting. It just opens up a huge amount of opportunities now in the project and program arena.
Yeah. So basically it's the umbrella term artificial intelligence. So you've got these other things underneath it. So if we take a look at machine learning, for example, this is when it gets quite, you know, it's complicated stuff here. And that's why you've got people like data scientists and, you know, people that are doing kind of programming languages and all that kind of stuff, because ultimately you need to be able to program initially before machine learning can start to happen. And it is more like, if you imagine, you come across it all the time with like customer service help desks, that it's kind of going to guess what it is you're going to ask first. You know, when you go on one of those chat things and it's always comes up straight away with, hello, Lindsay, how are you today? It's all, you know, it's been learning because it's had a vast amount of data to be able to know exactly what kind of things people are going to be asking, what time of day and what kind of inquiries they might ask. But from a project level, a kind of PMO point of kind of level, there are things in place that where you can look at how can we get better at estimates, because from an organisation point of view, we're estimating projects all the time. So if we're able to use the machine learning as a technique and a tool, we should, in theory, be able to have better estimates based on all that data that we've had before from estimates before. So, you know, it's interesting, but it's not just interesting, it's amazing stuff. But again, it's, you know, what kind of level do we want to get here? And I think what's really important about why we're doing this kind of webinar now, as opposed to 12 months or 18 months ago, is that actually in the whole world of artificial intelligence and data, what they found is that the technologies are way ahead of the people and process side. So what we're finding is that, yes, there's a lot of talk about, you know, this tech can do that. And actually, we have lagged behind in terms of, we also need the people being able to use this stuff, understand it, but also have some real process behind it so it can be used properly within a business and within a department, and also obviously within a PMO.
And it's like any other new thing that gets changed into the organization. We talk about it in project management often, don't we? We can kind of introduce changes, but actually it takes some further work, and obviously, and often sometimes more work to actually embed that in the organization, so it becomes part and parcel of our new business as usual. And I think, you know, one of the things that we've certainly learned as we went through this is that the people side and the change side takes as much time and effort as it does to get this established around the individual technologies.
So the third one on there that we've heard a lot about over the 12, 18 months is this whole thing about predictive analytics. Essentially, most of us are doing what's called descriptive analytics, which is that kind of rear view mirror look at the way that we do our project reporting. Whereas predictive analytics is about being able to use the more sophisticated statistics and modeling that's available in order to be able to take what is fact, but also start to make predictions about the future, and certainly stuff that we would have, otherwise would not know. I mean, there's an obvious one that you will see day to day, which are things like Netflix, which is always giving you recommendations based on what you've seen before. That's the obvious one, but you can absolutely see how predictive analytics are a really interesting proposition when it comes to producing a report for senior executives. And you'll see through that as we go through the webinar, but it's not as simple as being able to have the ability to produce and use predictive analytics in reporting, but it's actually also that the people on the process side is a senior exec ready for this kind of information that they're going to be able to get.
One of the great uses of predictive analytics, and which kind of demonstrates where the PMO can kind of certainly use this, is, and it's an example I've kind of spoken about previously, is that if you look at status reports that we get in on a weekly or monthly basis from the projects or programs, we can kind of see that a project manager, so say Lindsay's putting a project reporting every Friday, and so every week Lindsay's project is tracking at green, which is kind of, from a currently as a PMO perspective, that's fine. Actually, what we can start doing is, where we start using the kind of the broader kind of set of data, is say, well, actually Lindsay used to send it in at kind of 3:30 on a Friday afternoon, and gradually over the last 3 months it's gone from 3:30 to 4 o'clock to 4:30 to 5 o'clock, and actually the last one was sent in 10:30 on a Friday night. And we have a look at some of the first earlier reports that were in Lindsay's natural kind of chatty and kind of style of kind of writing the report, and gradually, as the kind of the reports have kind of progressed over the last few weeks, they've got a little bit more kind of succinct and kind of quite snipped, and which is not Lindsay's natural style of reporting. And even though the project is still predicting green, what it does, it allows us then to highlight, to say, well, actually it may not be going green for much longer, because there's obviously something happening that's changed on the project, that actually the project manager now is starting to demonstrate some of the signs that actually there's a bit of stress around the project. So again, it's this kind of predictive stuff brings in lots of other information to allow us to kind of preempt some of the things that we would only be able to look at retrospectively through the current ways of working.
So the next one on the list there is the robotic process automation, and it's slightly different in that it's not necessarily about reporting, but it is more to do with automating some of the boring things that we do, some of those basic tasks that we do. You see it quite a lot in industries far and wide. It's wherever you have got any kind of repetitive task that doesn't actually require that much thought or effort, other than, it's a classic, it's the kind of cut and paste jobs that you have. So if you're taking data from one place and putting it into another, it's that kind of thing. So RPA for short, robotic process automation, is actually what it says on the tin. It's about automating any kind of processes. And what we found, what was quite interesting during the the lunch and creating that report, is it seems to be one of the areas that is perhaps easier, she says in inverted commas, to start having a play around with. And obviously we'll look at RPA as we go through, and you'll just see over my shoulder here that this PC is actually Cyril, who's a bot, and he's there doing some RPA stuff. So he gets in on that.
I feel as though he needs a face though, Lindsay.
So collectively then, when we talked all the way through his report, is that it's AI technologies, is that there are different things that that come underneath that umbrella. But from a PMO point of view, we were mostly interested in talking around data to information to the decision making, the kind of reporting that we do already, but also the kind of process automation stuff. So the two streams really, if we had to put it in those simplest terms. But collectively, when we talk about some of the tools and things, it's AI technologies as the umbrella term.
So the actual report was, is it a threat or an opportunity? And I was saying to Lindsay when we were putting kind of the storyboard together for today's webinar, that actually I would quite like to start with this, because I think this is really, especially in the current climate where we are with the COVID-19 out there, is that any big change that's imposed upon us can actually be a threat and an opportunity. Even though we've kind of got the question there as threat or an opportunity, very often it's a threat and an opportunity. And the difference in terms of which end we end up in that kind of arrow is really down to how we respond to that change. And I come back to my lovely Stephen Covey, who says we are all responsible for our own actions, and this whole concept of how we respond is a matter of choice for us. So I just wanted to kind of at the outset just think about a couple of the aspects where we could see, and we've heard in the press that there are a threat, but how we can actually kind of look at that and make sure that we make the most of that and see it as an opportunity to continue to develop our PMOs and add them as value to the organisation. So going back to Cyril, yes, there is a real possibility that actually all of that repetitive work that we do, and the people who do all of that repetitive work will no longer have a job. Yes, that's just kind of, if we can get a computer to, and I remember when I was a teenager, which is several years ago now, there was, I remember somebody was saying, oh, computers are coming in, they'll not need us anymore. And it's quite interesting, it's not about not needing us as individuals, they just don't necessarily need us to do the services that we currently do. But actually it gives us, those tasks will still be done, but it's what we do with that. And therefore we can actually take away some of the grunt work from PMOs and say, well, actually now we have all of this kind of predictions and kind of predictive work. We can actually then look at that and do some insights and analysis and spend time on actually what that means to the organization. And I know a lot of the PMOs we talk to is actually they spend a vast majority of their time kind of cut and pasting things from a PowerPoint to Word and Word to PowerPoint, kind of sticking things in spreadsheets. And actually they don't have the time to demonstrate that they have an understanding of what those numbers mean and the impact on the organization. The second thing, which again can be a threat or an opportunity to us in the PMO, is actually moving into a data driven world. And if we do not prepare ourselves in terms of developing our skills and capability, and we still bank on, kind of extracting information from PowerPoints and Word documents that are sent from our project managers, then our PMO world becomes very much irrelevant to the rest of the organization, and we look outdated. So in order to kind of really make the most of this, we need to embrace it. And very often, as we'll come on to talk about, we'll need to lead the way in terms of how data can drive some of the decisions that need to be made around projects and programs. So the next one, and we will kind of touch on this again before the end of the presentation, is data. And one of the challenges we have is data. It kind of remains siloed around various bits of the organization. And we'll, as I say, we will mention this, is about actually we start to become the hunter-gatherer for the data and making sure we can assimilate that data and actually kind of analyze it to provide information back into the organization. And it changes what we do, and it enhances our role within the PMO to support the decision making, which is one of the roles the PMO fulfills. And finally, around the decisions, and this is quite an interesting one, in terms of some of the behaviours associated with decision making. Providing data without some of the kind of the translation can be read in very different ways. And one of the things that we need to be very good at from a PMO perspective is about making sure that the data provided is unambiguous and unbiased, which is kind of quite a task. And also, again, it's about being able to use that data to drive decisions in the organization and take some positive action. And one of the things, and I talk about it when we do the benefits management piece, is that spreadsheets and data don't make decisions, that the decision making still falls on individuals who use this as a basis for their decision making. But it's really interesting in terms of where there can be an abdication of accountability, because they say, well, actually, I just did what the numbers told me to do. So we have to recognize as well about how accountability remains with the individuals who take those decisions. So as we go through it, what we want to look at is around kind of, well, actually, that all sounds a bit scary. And even we've used some kind of terms that we don't necessarily fully understand. But actually, we may not necessarily be given a choice, because this is not always a change where we've made a choice. If we think about what's happening currently, how many of us have kind of chosen to be kind of kept at home with a COVID-19? And again, if we don't get on board, some of the external drivers may actually kind of overtake us. So I find this a fascinating kind of quote from a PwC report, is that senior managers, the executive, have lots of questions that they want answered in order to make the right decisions for their organization. And from PwC's perspective, that has not, the gap between what they want and what they need has not closed in the last 10 years. And the AI technologies provide us with the opportunity to actually kind of close that gap quite significantly. And that's the wider business perspective. And I have to say that's really important when it comes to a portfolio management level. But individual project management, and we've talked about kind of delivery of change. If you've ever had a P3M3 assessment, one of the things that we sell in terms of maturity of project management is that it gives us some certainty, or improves the certainty of delivery, and improves our ability to actually deliver. And research from the PMI has said that those organizations who are adopting AI are outperforming project delivery now in other organizations where that's not the case. And again, the final bit in terms of, from a PMO perspective, the report by Gartner, which is the one that kind of scared an awful lot of the PMOs around the industry, is that by 2030, which is in 10 years time now, if that seems a long way off, just think how recent it was we did the millennium. That's the scary thing. It's 20 years since the millennium. So just 10 years hence, we're going to be 80% of the project management will be eliminated around the kind of the data tracking and recording. So if that's, if you think about what percentage of work that is in our PMOs, that's how much we need to kind of redistribute within the next kind of 8 years, 10 years, if we'd want to be left behind. So one of the other things is from internally, is kind of what we want to do. And if we're looking to improve our PMO, we need to think about what some of our internal drivers. One of the challenges we've got is when we provide information, is that it's not always clear what bias there is in that. So, you know, we will have drivers from our own communities, from the project management community, but also from the business community, to remove ambiguity in the information that we provide. Secondly, there's very few PMOs who actually have the time and effort to do everything they want to do. So we're constantly being challenged about demonstrating value to the organization, and are we worth the 27 resources we've got doing all of that. So this allows us to be much more kind of efficient in terms of the work, and effective in the work that we're going to do. So Lindsay, you're going to pick up the remaining drivers, yes?
Okay, all right. So what we'd also found from the lunch was that people were talking about the opportunity to dabble is actually something that wasn't there 12, 18 months ago. And I think for them, what had been driving it is the fact that some of the tools, the technology side of it is very self-service, but it was accessible, but it's easy to use compared to, you know, how it had used to be. So there's an opportunity there to actually start to pick up and use some of this stuff. There's a relatively low kind of investment to do so, but also there's an opportunity to dabble in terms of there is that opportunity to learn, because unless you've had your head stuck in the sand the last year or so, you will certainly see that there's a lot of stuff out there around things like called data science, which all, you know, is essentially what we're talking about. So there is a lot of stuff that's there to be able to start to do some learning around it. The other one as well is that they found that actually that we demand it now. And what you mean by that is that if you think about what you're using in your personal life every day, which is very AI driven stuff. I mean, we're, you know, just talking about Alexa or Siri, just as a very small example, but even stuff like using, you know, just things like pieces of software like Trello, for example, or even Zoom, as we've found in the last couple of weeks, is that we're able to quickly pick up a lot more that's really easy to use. And then when we come back into the workplace, it feels like we're using things that are quite archaic. You know, sometimes you're having problems just trying to access certain websites on a browser. It all feels very clunky and horrible. So it's about being able to, how can we bring in all this stuff that we're learning in our private lives, our friends and families, actually into the workplace. And that's part of, you know, where we're going next with the next slide, which is, we'd heard this word a lot when we had been talking to people that had been at the hack events, and some people that had been starting to do stuff within their PMO. The word curious came up, and it was all about where they were starting. I think that was the most popular question, is like, how do you get going with this kind of stuff? And the answer was always that, well, you have to be curious about it. If you're not, and if you're a project or a PMO leader, you certainly should be thinking about, well, who in the team have I got that is curious about it? Because you need the curiosity in order to start to dabble and to want to and to question. If you look at the characteristics of what do we mean by being a curious person, that, you know, that you're somebody that is passionate about this role and about generating different ideas of how the PMO can help the organization, and you think more broadly about what it is that you do, and that you enjoy discussion and debate around some of the things that you're doing, and that you tend to look outside the organization to see how others are doing, or not necessarily in other PMOs, but also in different industries, to see what you could filter really and start to use within your PMO. And also people that are, you know, that you're asking open questions. So it's about being curious about some of this stuff has to be there in order for you to be able to get to the next bit, which is playing. And we're not being, you know, playing in that kind of offhand, you know, let's just have a dabble and a mess about. You know, it's just another way for doing some kind of R&D, research and development type stuff within the PMO. but to have to do something, to play that does have a purpose and does have an outcome. But it is that word about playing, because we're not sure how all this is hanging together. Sometimes within organisations that we'd found from PMO managers is that there were nobody else within the organisation that was playing. So why can't we have a go at it? So a lot of the words in the report you'll see makes, talk about things like data playground, and that's important to be able to have that kind of mindset that you are just playing about, because we absolutely don't know how this is going to work, but let's try and find out. One of the things they also talked about, the PMO managers, was about something called moonshot questions. But if you could actually come up with a really, really great question that the business couldn't afford to ignore, that's the kind of moonshot question that allows us to, can we play with that question, and can we use data and start to play around with some of the technology and the processes and stuff to try and find that answer. So for example, one of the examples they gave in the session was, what would it take for a sponsor to shut down a project? We don't at the moment have really great answers for that. So it's what really great business question could you come up with, but they absolutely would love the answer for. And as a matter of fact today, that they can't get that answer. It's not possible. But they know it's somewhere, possibly in the data. One of the things that they also we loved was the fact that they are prepared to be a guinea pig. And this came from it's other areas of the business, and particularly coming from an IT department. But if a guinea pig was required, the PMO is going to stick his hand up and say, absolutely, we want to get involved in here. And the leader of the menagerie is basically, well, let us play with it. Let us see where we can get with this kind of stuff. Let us be the guinea pig, but also let us then share some of the insights that we've learned, so being the leader of all the rest of the departments and all that kind of stuff, as when they start to have a play around with this stuff too, because it is happening now and it will continue to happen. A curious PMO is not one that is just about play, that it also is thinking about, we know that we have to have plans. That's what we're all about. It's the project in us, the project management in us, to have that kind of roadmap as well. So here in the report, we were talking about, well, what kind of things are in the roadmap, which is about, things like, well, where is the PMO going to be headed in the future? What are potentially going to be our building blocks to get there? What help are we going to need along the way? What skills are we going to need along that journey? What blockers are we likely to come across? And, we have to start some kind of formal plans, just so it's not a pipe dream. And finally, they're also thinking about all this extra time that they're going to be able to free up, especially things around robotic process automation. And as the thing said from Gartner, about 80% of the project management work, you'll see a lot of the things there were about data collection, data cleansing type activities, things that we never wanted to do anyway. So if we can finally get rid of those kind of tasks, what do we do with the extra time when we've started to see some real outcomes and benefits to this kind of work? Eileen, we need to talk about data.
We do, and it's a subject we can't get away from, and it's one that scares lots of PMOs, particularly those who don't necessarily have an integrated PRM system that allows them to have all of the project data in one place. And we have to start thinking about how we deal with that data in our organizations, because it's something we absolutely have to address. But this interesting in terms of kind of what data is required, and Lindsay was just talking there about, kind of moonshot questions and the questions we want to answer. And a couple of the Project Hat weekends, we've had some interesting, there's almost kind of two different sides to come from this. In terms of the playing about, often we can do that playing about with data that we already have. So we will have some data somewhere around our projects, whether that be kind of finance data, whether that be risk data. And actually some of that playing can be done with the data we've got. But actually, we do very quickly, as we start to kind of roll this out, have to get into a position where we start having a data strategy and start thinking, well, actually, if these are the questions that we need to answer for the organization or help the organization make decisions on, we need to think strategically about what data that's required. And then a lot of our work is actually get down to the next bit, which talks about, well, actually, well, how do we go about finding that data? And this is where we need to start being the whole kind of data hunters and gatherers about, does that data actually exist? And you'll hear this lovely term metadata, which is data about data. You know, so again, we talked about, well, actually, yes, we've got a status report that was submitted, but actually there's additional data around that, that report in terms of what time it was submitted, who submitted it. And it's this kind of the growth in terms of the big data and understanding what that looks like. Now, we are not necessarily going to be the absolute data specialists, and we'll kind of come on to that in the roles, but we need to start thinking about, well, how do we go about kind of hunting and finding that data? Because you'll find data, as we kind of go down through this process, is that data will belong to kind of different peoples around the organization, and defining who actually owns all of those various data elements becomes part of the work that we have to put in within our data strategy. So, you know, and again, one of the interesting things that came up in the talk time and time again is, well, actually, it isn't just about the data and making decisions on that data. It's some of the behavioral changes that will take place around understanding, well, actually, I thought that was, you know, I own that data and I don't necessarily want people to kind of see that element of the data. Becomes much more kind of open source, and everybody can see it. And we just need to be careful in terms of what we extrapolate from that data. Undoubtedly, there's going to be some challenges in terms of where that data is. I always kind of refer to an old friend of mine who ran a PMO, and one of the first pieces of work I did as a consultant was working with them to improve their project delivery capability, and we're pulling together their project management method. And Agnes had a file, a lever-arched A4 file for all of the projects that had been delivered in the last 4 or 5 years of their project. And I keep referring back to Agnes and say, I bet you Agnes could find the signed business case for a project 3 years ago easier than we can find it now with all of the multiple data sources, because we don't know whether it's in SharePoint, whether it's on my laptop, whether it's in some central PRM system, because there is so much data around the place. So that becomes a real challenge. And then, of course, the final one is, well, when we've got all of it together, well, actually, what do we do with it? And so our data strategy needs to cover all of these 5 elements to look at kind of where and how we're going to use the data to make sure that we collect it and collate it. We make sure that we're careful around the behavioral aspects and some of the exposure aspects in terms of how that data can be used. And in order to do that, we need to kind of get to grips with this whole data element. So on the next slide, what we start talking about then is about improving our data literacy. Not just ours, but the whole of the kind of PMO, and driving data literacy across the project community. When I say the project community, that's the project and program managers, but also the executives who work in this area, about making sure that it's not just a case of, well, actually, it's interesting because this is where there's a real interesting group of people who go to things like the Project Hack, is you've got some real technical people who do the programming, as Lindsay mentioned, about kind of extracting all of that data and being able to kind of pull the data into a place that's actually usable. But actually then we've got the project knowledge that allows you to be able to look at that and analyze that and find out what that actually information means. One of the things that we've been talking about over the last kind of couple of days, and I suppose a number of you have been watching the daily updates from the COVID-19 from the central government, and we've been bemused, critical, challenging around how they've been representing that data in terms of the data visualization. So, you know, we shouldn't underestimate how the data can be misrepresented, but even by picking the wrong color when putting it in a graph. So this whole kind of data visualization becomes kind of really quite important. And we have to drive a data culture, and we shouldn't underestimate the amount of effort it takes to change the culture, any type of culture in an organization. And moving to an organization that is data driven is not an insignificant piece of work. And working with all of the, one of the things we were working on the competency framework this morning around kind of change management, is actually, it's about the hearts and minds of the individuals, as well as the hard kind of process and kind of the data strategy that we've just talked about. And what we'll see is potentially some new roles and some new services that happens within the PMO. So we've it's interesting in terms of we were having a kind of conversation about, is it easier to take a data scientist, a real techie person, and teach them project management, or do we take a project management expert from the PMO and kind of teach them data science? And actually the two can still be kind of quite separate roles, but they kind of work together. And so from a PMO analyst perspective, it's about doing that analysis. And actually this whole new role of the data scientist, so whether that's in the organization or whether that sits within the PMO, is something that we'll see evolve. The really exciting things is that there's new apprenticeships coming through around data science that we can kind of perhaps engage with within our PMOs. This data translator role is becoming even more important. One of the roles that we've always had from a PMO perspective, from a PMO perspective, is being able to kind of be that bridge between business as usual and the kind of the business requirements and the project and program management land. And that data translator role is really builds on that in terms of what the data actually means and what the implications are from some of the decisions that get made from that. So this whole concept of data has to become a renewed focus from the PMO. And we started, I think, the concept of a single version of the truth, but it actually is going to have to be a much bigger part of our role going forward. So that's if we want to be doing anything with AI, machine learning and predictive analytics, data is the big thing. However, one area that might be easier to start with is RPA, which Lindsay's going to take you through, which is going to introduce you more formally to Cyril.
Yeah, great. We'll come back to, we've got some questions around skills and stuff, so we'll just come back to that after the RPA bit. So for anybody who's already come across Flashmob before, you might have seen a webinar that we've already done around Cyril. It is available on the website, and there's a whole like kind of hour, 40 minutes, 50 minutes chat about this. So with a lot more detail and some templates and what have you. So we kind of preempted that this, you know, we found in November that this was, you know, an area that felt like it was easier to get going with, and indeed our PMO managers around the table had started doing something by just generally just talking to the team about, well, let's get some ideas about, well, which processes can be automated, and then from there start to think about creating a workflow diagram and a process, including the tools and the programs used, which is a really interesting exercise to do anyway, and something that actually PMO people should have some skill in, because they should already be doing things like process improvement anyway as part of maturing the PMO. So from a process point of view, again, in the previous webinar, and we'll make sure you've got access to that as well. It's on the website. It talks about, well, what is in that workflow. From there, then, he's talking about how you can start to play around with it, and there is RPA tools available, and we used UiPath just because it's the free version and you can get going, and that's what that is over there. I know he looks as dead as a dodo, but he's, you know, he's doing stuff, you know, we're leaving to it. But we did have a question actually about this one, which is an interesting one, which is if you'd already set up and been using macros in Excel for doing repetitive tasks, does that count as RPA? or is a term more to do with the bot? And I think what is the thing here is about robotic process automation is that it's not specific to one particular tool. So it is, you're able to use and automate across lots of different systems, including things like doing some web scraping. You might be dropping that into Excel. It could be then opening up an email and doing an automated email out like that. So it's across a lot of different programs, I would say is probably the best way to describe it. Plus they have something called attended and unattended bots, which is probably sounds a little bit like the macro one where you've got to actually press a button, whereas with RPA there is some automation that you don't have to do anything and you leave them to it. So there is there's a lot to learn and to understand from it. But if you put a personal name on it, like Cyril, it all might start to feel a bit more human. Well, you know, it's not a machine; it's Cyril, you know. And then the other thing we'd found with doing any kind of work like this is you have to start talking to the IT department about what it is you're looking to achieve and start that conversation. It might be a tricky conversation, but actually there can't be, there's already other departments within the business operations that are perhaps already doing some of this stuff anyway. And all you're going to do is talk to them about, well, actually, we'd like to see some of this stuff in the change the business side. So, you know, hopefully conversations on what we say difficult. They may be now, but in 6 months, 12 months time, it's completely different kind of landscape. And that's how quickly things are changing right now. And what we found was getting started with a very simple process, first of all, and learning from that and building from that is the way to go. Because we had another question about skills, about where do we get the skills from to do some of this kind of stuff. And I think it is partially linked in with being curious, is that if you're not that kind of person yourself, that you should be looking for that person in the team that you already have that is interested in doing this kind of stuff. And we do have some, you know, some things in here about how you can start to involve the team in order to do some of these things. There's a lot of stuff out there on the web, just generally about data, you know, data collation, but also from things like RPA. As Eileen mentioned, there is a particular, the only one that we've come across is that there is a specific apprenticeship program for project data analytics, which surprisingly for me, I thought apprentice were like people that were straight out of school or college. It's not the case at all. You can do it within your own organisation, regardless of what your job is now, if you want to show that you want to go down this avenue and to start to learn. So we've got some information on apprenticeships that we will share with you. And of course, watch this space, because I think we're going to be doing a lot more on this particular subject over the coming months as well. So lots more learning coming your way. So just to finish up, we've got some PMO nuggets that came out. Eileen?
Yes, so it's interesting. Going back to the poll we did at the beginning of the session, we had kind of different 4 options for people to kind of work with. The last option was, yes, we've embraced AI technologies and we're actually starting to get some benefits across the organisation. And interestingly, nobody on this webinar has actually got to that point, which means there's loads of opportunity to start thinking about doing that. And going back to the point that Lindsay made with the curious PMOs, it's about having a view about where we want to get to, about how best we can use it and how that's going to help the organisation. So again, it's about making sure that if we want to actually kind of get some benefits from that, we have that as a starting point. So we may be playing, and that playing informs our choices in terms of what benefits we're going to go after. And in order to get those benefits, like good old any old business case, we need to kind of have some investment. Now, in the short term, that investment might just be some of the time, your time, and some of the PMO's time. So I always kind of look at kind of the Google example, where on a kind of a Friday, they're allowed to play, but they have to do a report back in terms of what they've been playing on and what they've found out. So in the short term, the investment is just about finding the time to do that, but actually then being able to go back to the organization, being able to demonstrate kind of what the benefits will be to the organization, so you can get investment for perhaps looking at some of the kind of the bigger plans and some of the bigger things that you will have to do in order to drive AI technologies in your organization. Yours, Lynn.
Next few are about more people related, and that we'd found that actually in terms of leadership, it's now is a good time for the PMO to be showing some leadership around this particular aspect, because if you think back to the time when Agile started to become a thing, we kind of got caught on a back foot a little bit about what is the PMO response to this, and this is an opportunity for us to step up right now to kind of preempt that ever happening again. So why not have a PMO heading up this kind of change and being an exemplar to other people that are probably come on later down the line? Why can't we be early adopters? In terms of people, we know we want curious people, but it's also about being able to manage the detractors and the knowing who the cheerleaders are for this. It's getting people involved that are wider than just the PMOs, the project managers, it's the program managers, it's the finance teams, whoever it might be. We need to be thinking about that aspect of it, which is obviously a massive part of any kind of change management type stuff. And then a mindset was really interesting, is that we're known for using data to control. And actually the shift is about using data to manage uncertainty. And it's going to take us a while as a PMO to be able to shake that label off that we've had for a long time, which is about being a control function. So it's an interesting shift, and it's going to be up to us to be able to, how are we going to make that shift in people's minds?
So the final three are really about kind of going back to how we work and what we work with. So moving to the data-driven piece, what we shouldn't kind of forget is that we're still going to need all of our soft skills, and there's as much about people as it is about data. So we don't want to get to a position where we just become kind of data manipulators. 7 is, I've talked a little bit about data. One of the things that what we don't want to do is frighten everybody into thinking, we all suddenly have to become kind of data geeks. It's about kind of understanding that data and improving our skills and capability, and using, as Lindsay mentioned, the other areas of the organization who can help, including our IT department. And we have to recognize that kind of moving this data culture is an organizational wide piece. We can do some bottom up work from the PMO, but we have to recognize there comes a point, and going back to the kind of the point I made about benefits and investment, we need to get to a position where we have a kind of a top down strategy in terms of how that becomes what and how our organization uses data around project and program decision making. So I'm conscious we said there'd be questions, Lindsay.
Yeah, well, we've done a few as we've gone through. I've got one more as well right now. So obviously when we were doing this back in November, the world was a very different place. With everything that's going on at the moment, do we really have time for this stuff from a PMO point of view? What do you think?
Are you talking to me, or are you talking about
to you?
to you. Well, I kind of think what's fascinating is I don't think we've got time not to at this point. One of the interesting things that has come up, there's an awful lot of people who are being kind of furloughed at the moment, and training and development is still allowed. So it's a great time to pick up some of the kind of the UiPath stuff and kind of taking time to read. And for those of us who are still kind of working, it's about trying to make ourselves more efficient during the remote working, because actually some of the communication pieces are becoming more of a challenge. And one of the things we found, actually communication virtually takes longer to do and is sometimes more difficult, and therefore if that's going to take more of our time, then we have to look at doing some of the more kind of the what I would say the kind of the grunt work around the data and around the things that we can automate. Actually is a really good time to start putting those things in place.
So for people that are not downloaded the report, it's in true classic PMO Flashmob style, that we have stuffed it full with stuff and different aspects that we talked about over the course of the lunch. We've even got traffic light reported in there. So for people that are feeling a bit uncomfortable about all of this kind of AI stuff, there's a lot of things in here that are not about the technology. I must confess, when we were going to do this lunch, I was dreading it. I just thought this is going to be so boring. It's going to be about technology. I'm not interested, not really. And actually, what was a really big surprise about this is very, very people focused. You know, ultimately, AI is about managing data in different forms and stuff, but just like anything, anybody can do that, but you've got to be able to use it in some way. And it's that aspect of it which I think aligns really well with what we do in PMO land. So hopefully you'll enjoy having a read of that. And if you have got any questions, you know where we are if you want to follow up. We've come to the end of the session, and I just had another question, sorry, about the apprenticeship that we mentioned. It's available, it's a project data analytics apprenticeship. If you go and have a look at projecting success, stick that into Google, you'll see that organisation. Many of you might have come across Martin Paver, who's been somewhat a spearhead for this kind of stuff, which is great. You can go and have a look at the apprenticeship stuff there and just understand a little bit more about, actually, it's probably not what you think it is, because I didn't have a clue really until I started talking to Martin about it. Essentially, this session will be available to watch again. The report's available, as you can see, online right now. And if you've not come across our new thing that we're doing in lockdown, hashtag PMO WFH, PMO's working from home, it's tomorrow, every Wednesday at 3 o'clock UK time. So join us then. It's a lucky dip. You never know what we're going to be talking about, but it'll be fun. Okay. Thank you very much, everybody. You take care right now. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.